I've been with Stop Destroying Videogames for more than 2 years now. I'm currently studying computer science, and I'm currently deputy director for our newly formed NGO. And I would like to present you all how the games these days are being destroyed and how there is no necessity for it. So we are a group of EU citizens, all the volunteers, without any formal funding. From the very start, we did it everything from the pure passion. And we are professors, lawyers, developers, content creators, engineers, really from any walk of life. And to add to it something that we made like 1.3 million EU signatures, and we got many support in the global scale. So how the game is actually being destroyed. The first game, I can show the flowchart here. It's previously sold to customers, and how are these games typically destroyed. The first thing is that the publisher sells a copy to a video game. Second thing, that the game is designed to connect to publishers in order to work. Then the customer is not told when the game will stop working at the time of the purchase. After the disclosed time, the length of time, the purchase of the disabled games for the customer. The publisher keeps all the customers' money for the sales, and as a cherry on top, the publisher enacts countermeasures to prevent any repair of the game. As for the game longevity, I would like to say that most games can just work indefinitely without the publisher support, and this has been customers' expectation for more than 50 years now. But let's say 15 or 20 years ago, there's been rise of the live service and only online games that publishers are being profitable on, and I totally agree with that, and it's their business model, but it kind of prevents from the preservation and that the game is being killed as a service. The video games that connect to the internet can also operate indefinitely without the support if they are designed responsibly. I would like to also address the lack of consumer protection, that the games are permanently disabled as soon as the publisher support ends. There's also lack of transparency. The customers are not informed about their access at the end of the purchase, as I mentioned before, and the information on the game's lifespan is integral to the customer buying decision, as if a customer would like to spend 70 euros on the, let's say, game, which is like average price these days, he will probably think twice if the games will be probably turned off or killed 2 or 3 years ago. Sorry, 2 years in the future, or maybe a few months. Just so it's like also the sales for the publishers would drop, and yeah, publishers doesn't want that. Also, I would like to right now present you the video games requiring connections to the publisher. How percentage we made. There was a statistic from the volunteer study from the February 2026, and how these gamers have been asked how these games be killed for them. So we can see that the games with the multiplayer modes, the 95.4%, the majority of games has been disabled for them. The publisher disabled customers' game, and the 4.6%, just a little bit of them, the publishers let the customers keep their games. And if you look at the full games only, without the multiplayer modes, we can see the similar result, that majority of these games has been disabled by publishers, and only 6.2% publishers could let the customers keep their game. And these practice are engaged by, let's say, these publishers. You can see like Activision, Electronic Arts, Sony, Square Enix, Ubisoft, and the goes just continues on and on. I would like to also address the customers' impact. The gamers in Europe, we are like 130 million Europeans that play games, which is roughly 30% of the whole population, which is like we can really tell this touches many people, and we don't really talk about the global scale. This is just for the Europe, so it impacts tens of millions of customers in the EU itself. I would like to also tell it from the developers' perspective. The majority of developers do want their work to be destroyed, do not want the work being destroyed, because let's say they work for 6 or 7 years, and then the games get shut down, and their work being just being destroyed effectively. There's like they cannot show their children what they've been working for because like their work is being destroyed. And also, many developers are overruled by the publishers' directives, and they cannot make those decisions for themselves. I would like to address that we are also open to solutions, just like we are flexible on specific and implementation by publishers, providing final patch of the sunsetting game or releasing files for the gamers so they can make their own servers, or simply they could refund, which is also the option. We also understand that not all games features may be operable in the discontinued game. Some of the online features just cannot exist without the online connection. And I would like to stress that we are not seeking the ongoing support from the publishers after the game is discontinued. The final patch would suffice. I want to also address the non-solution and the examples of proposals which do not address this problem itself, the problem of game preservation. The clear labeling, the improving license agreement terms doesn't prevent from game restriction. Mandating minimum support times only delays inevitable loss. I can also address the extended notice, that more notice doesn't provide a technical solution for the presentation or the right to repair the game. And voluntary plans that are relying on the voluntary end-of-life plans lacks the regulatory enforceability, as it is now. And for the conclusion, from my side, major publishers ignore customers' rights and spoil the market both for the customers and good faith actors. There is a clear need for the harmonized regulation that is essential to avoid the market chaos to ensure robust protection for the EU customers. And I will also say from myself and also from my whole team that, and also from 1.3 million people who are backing this initiative with their signatures from 24/7 countries, that the EU citizens are respectfully asked the committee to address this critical consumer right issue. And also I would like to say on the end part that we are now witnessing the library of the Alexandria all over again, and it's burning every time the piece of software is wiped from the existence. We don't need to time machine to save the history. We just need to stop letting it burn today. Thank you for your attention.
I'm Professor Alberto Hidalgo Cerezo at University San Pablo CEU, Madrid, Spain, at the Department of Private Law and Rights of the Citizen. I am PhD in Law, Jean Monnet Professor and Researcher with the Jean Monnet Project dedicated to consumer law harmonization, especially on digital consumers. I am a member of the European Law Institute, the Royal Academy of Law and Jurisprudence of Spain, among others, and a ward of the Madrid Bar of Lawyers in European Union law. Also recently in the section of eSports for my work regarding this citizens' initiative, Stop Destroying Video Games. I'd like to thank my colleagues, members of the legal team of this ECI, Abel Vallejo and Martin Bartzik, and my intervention is less than 10 minutes long. It has only 5 slides, and it's grounded in 3 basic ideas. First one, how this unfair practice harms consumers' rights in the European Union, and hence how we need a unified solution to safeguard legal certainty to achieve an effective single digital market. Second, the vocation of European Union primary law to provide a high level of protection for the rights of the consumers. Third, a real example of these terms and conditions we consider harmful for consumers in the video gaming market. Please keep this slide. This slide is fine for now. So, first of all, rebalance for an adequate consumer protection in the digital single market. We are addressing what we consider an unfair practice. When a game is functional, it should not cease to function as a result of a deliberate and avoidable decision. This raises concerns of planned or even forced digital obsolescence, where products that are rendered unusable despite remaining technically viable. Consumers are defenseless against this practice. Even more, there is not even a right to repair applicable to video games. Please, when possible, next slide. Second, need for a harmonized solution. There is also a clear need for harmonization. National authorities are reaching divergent solutions, undermining legal certainty and causing fragmentation of the single digital market. This has potential to cause a distortion of the digital single market in the future. In the lack of an action, the absence of a harmonized solution, will cause the problem to extend in time with 27 different national approaches that will be harder to harmonize afterwards, causing a de facto fragmentation and malfunctioning of the European digital single market. Consumers from all countries should equally receive the same rights, the same level of protection when buying the same games in the same stores within the digital single market. Please, when possible, third slide. European Union as a global leader in consumer protection. Over 60 years have passed since President of the US, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, pronounced the speech that provided the 4 basic consumer rights we still have today. Those are information, protection of their interests, their economic interests, safety, also health, and association. These very 4 same rights are equally reflected and recognized in our Treaty of Functioning of European Union, Article 179, which we will see later. Please, let's keep something in mind. Nowadays, it is almost impossible to develop as a full citizen without being a consumer. We all buy goods and services in our daily lives, taking part in our single market with a high level of protection. Therefore, in the end, it is easy to see. Protecting consumers is protecting citizens, as Kennedy said back in 1962. Now, for more than 50 years in the European Union, the EU policies have developed a global leading identity around consumer protection and the single market. Nowadays, this very same level of protection has to reach a new destination, the digital single market. Primary EU law remains constant in securing a high level of protection for consumers at the maximal legislative level in the EU law. For instance, Charter of the Fundamental Rights of the European Union, Article 38. Union policies shall ensure a high level of consumer protection. Treaty of Functioning of the European Union, Article 12. Consumer protection requirements shall be taken into account in defining and implementing other union policies and activities. Or 169.1, in order to promote the interests of consumers and to ensure a high level of consumer protection, again, the Union shall contribute to protecting the health, safety, economic interests of consumers, as well as promoting their right to information, education, and to organize themselves in order to safeguard their interests, like in this ECI. There are other articles, but we're keeping it simple. This is a call from primary EU law that we should not mix. Please, when possible, fourth slide. Real example of terms and conditions. Now, as proof of the problem, here is a real case of an user license agreement, which comes from the company ZeniMax Bethesda. Game is Fallout 76. The clause is number 7, termination. ZeniMax may terminate this end user agreement at any time, for any reason or no reason, including blah, 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 blah. Upon termination by ZeniMax for any reason, all licenses granted in this agreement, blah, 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 with respect to the game, shall immediately terminate, and you must immediately do number 1 and 2. 1, permanently destroying all the copies of the game in your possession or control. And 2, removing the game client from your hard drive. We believe this practice is unfair for the European consumers, incompatible with the aforementioned articles from the primary EU law. Hence, we kindly ask your honors to stop this kind of harmful practices. Please, when possible, final slide. Conclusions. Major publishers in the video game industry are operating in a manner that ignores consumers' rights, creating an unbalanced field. Please, we must realize something here. Consumers are defenseless in front of these practices. This is a classic historical topic in consumer law, in its very core, in its fundamentals. And it is really simple. Individual consumers don't have the force, one by one, to face these practices. It is clear to see, but it's also a typical problem, and the Court of Justice of the European Union has referred to it in its doctrine, historically and peacefully. For instance, case 240/98, 168/05, 618/10, 693/19. There are a few, there are lots of them. To summarize, individuals cannot face the factual force that a company can apply, especially in the digital sphere. So this is also a very basic manifestation on why this European Citizens Initiative got the support from the citizenship in the first place. So in the absence of a stop of these practices, companies have the factual force to just cut access, destroy, etc., leaving consumers without the game and without the money. And this is unbalanced and unfair and fails to comply with the call from primary EU law we mentioned earlier. Clear harmonization regulation for such practices is needed to avoid distortion between countries that operate in the same digital single market. In my eyes, and please correct me if I'm wrong, we need harmonized solutions for 27 countries if we don't want to fragment the video gaming market into 27 different approaches, which would cause confusion, diverse levels of protection for the EU consumers depending on their state, a major effort for the industry to comply with 27 different legal regimes. And in my eyes, this is the opposite of one of the main pillars of the EU, one of our common values as EU citizens, the single market. In this case, the goal to achieve is a real digital single market. In the end, the citizens of Europe are asking the European Union for help. We are respectfully asking the members of the EU to address this issue. I want to thank you all very much for your time and attention. Thank
you. Good afternoon. I'm Catarina Vieira, member of the European Parliament for the Greens EFA group and elected in the Netherlands. And I wanted to start with thanking you for the invite and apologize that I'll have to leave in about 40 minutes, so I can't stay until the end. But really nice to join you. And you say that you start with the experts, and I have to admit I'm no expert. So let me start there by saying I think we have a lot of experts in the room. We have a lot of experts on consumer rights, which today are learning a lot about video games. And we have a lot of video games experts who today are taking time out of their jobs, out of their daily lives, and out of the opportunity to play the new Forza Horizon 6 that came out today to instead follow this discussion. So I thank you all. And if I'm not an expert on any of these things, maybe I am a member of the European Parliament, which means speaking on behalf of the European citizens and on behalf of our democracy. And that's where I wanted to start on the fact that this is triggered. This conversation has been triggered by European Citizens Initiative, an ECI, that is, in my view, one of the things to celebrate about our European Union. And I think sometimes it goes without saying, but it should be said, it's not easy to gather 1.3 million signatures for anything. And the kind of mobilization and active participation that people do to bring these issues to the table, to gather communities, to move action from online to offline to real policy making spaces is extremely important. And us as European Union institutions, as the Parliament, as the Commission, and all others, have the responsibility to celebrate that and to take action on what the citizens bring to the table. So I guess that's where I wanted to start. We've done this before in the session that we had in the committee of the European Parliament, but to really take a moment to acknowledge the hard work of the organizers and to congratulate them, because this kind of mobilization is very unique, and I think really provides an opportunity to put people who are not often in touch with European policy making in the room and engaging on the topics that are important for them. Maybe to speak a little bit about the European Parliament, we had a session on this matter in a joint committee session of the PETI committee, so the Petitions Committee, the URI committee, and the IMCO committee. So 3 committees are involved in this matter. And I was at that session, and I have to say that what really stood out to me, apart from the clarity of the explanations and the level of detail that we really received from the organizers of the initiative, was a very successful cross-party support for the initiative that is presented. So I think that is in a time where we're very divided and things can be very polarizing, it's important to also note that this is an initiative that can receive a lot of support in the European Parliament. And there we've been presented with very clear examples of why this is a problem for consumers. and what are the different avenues to fix it, and also what things wouldn't fix the problems that are there. And I think really this is, as lawmakers, as possible lawmakers on this matter, our work is really cut out for us in a very clear way with a lot of evidence and in a way that anyone can understand, and that we can move forward on legislation if so becomes the case, if the Commission comes forward with more something more tangible on this matter. And ultimately that would be good because, as the experts have mentioned, as also I think Alberto was saying, this is something that if we go ahead, we want to do it at a harmonized level across the European Union, which is always the goal when we have one single market. And maybe a moment here to say that while it's really important, of course, that we protect our consumers and that we take initiative as the European Union, I want to really highlight that this is a very global movement. So based on the experience, the very short experience I've had in engaging with this initiative, I received feedback from citizens, from gamers across the world, across our union, in different member states, but also in other countries. I received comments and messages from people from the US, people from various countries saying, hey, I'm really glad to see a parliament discussing this matter and taking initiative on this matter. And I really think this is a very good and clear example of something the EU can do very well, which is to be a front runner on issues that become global issues, because citizens across the world suffer from the consequences of video games being discontinued or denied, consumers being denied access to them when there's no need for that. So I really want to highlight this also as an opportunity for the European Union to be a front runner on digital rights, on video games. And that brings me to how we see video games as a whole, because obviously if you're not a gamer, and I'm not much of a gamer myself, it might feel like, you know, it's a hobby, it's something you do for fun, and it is, but it's also very personal, and it is in itself an art form. It can be very emotional, it can be very beautiful, it attaches a lot of memories, it's something that really you spend many hours. I think many of you, if not yourself gamers, maybe have family members who you see do that. And I think it's really important that we start rethinking this from not only from the consumer rights perspective, but also from a cultural heritage and the protection of that cultural heritage. And I mean, I have cried seeing outcomes of video games that I didn't even play myself. But if you've seen I'm thinking of Planet of Lana, which is a video game that my partner played that really stole my heart. So what I'm trying to say is it's a lot more than just entertainment. It's really something that is worth preserving. And for that, I'm really curious to hear from the next panelists, and especially from Beeld and Geluid, which I know do a lot of work in preservation of various forms of media and how important that work is. So to close off, because I promised to be short and I only have about 30 seconds left, my main message would be to celebrate the ECI, the democracy, the citizens movement, but also to nudge the Commission to, I mean, I know you're aware, I know you're here for a reason, but to really say from the Parliament side, you would have a lot of support, and I hope that you can do a thorough investigation of the gaps that we currently have on European legislation, and hopefully bring something forward that will address the concerns of gamers across the EU and hopefully also across the world. And thank you all very much for the invitation and for being here today. And I look forward to staying until I can, and afterwards I'll get notes from my team who's watching. Thank you very much.
So we, in Directorate General Justice and Consumers, but also together with my colleagues from DG Connect, we are co-leading the preparations of the Commission's response to this European Citizens Initiative. This is the 14th successful ECI, so European Citizens Initiative, to be submitted to the Commission for examination. And as you know, this initiative has collected over 1 million valid signatures across the EU and reached the minimum thresholds of 24 in 24 member states. So this shows that this issue is of interest to many of our citizens. Indeed, 3 in 4 Europeans play video games, and the average player age is still 31 years old. So therefore, the video gaming sector has a value that goes beyond economic figures. It's really a societal impact. So the ECI organizers had the opportunity to present the initiative to Executive Vice President Virkkunen, to Commissioner McGrath, and to the Commission services in February this year, and also, as mentioned by the MEP, to the European Parliament during the public hearing of 16 April. So we all agree with the importance of fair and transparent conditions for European consumers who sign up and pay for video games. In our response, the Commission will consider the proportionality of the requested measure and whether also the objectives of the initiative could be addressed, at least partly, through better enforcement or adaptation of existing rules. And it's true that EU consumer law does not currently impose any specific requirements on video game providers regarding the duration of supply. And current EU law also does not require the suppliers of digital content or service to make it available to consumers for continued use when they decide to end its commercial provision. Nevertheless, EU consumers are entitled to transparent information about the digital services that they offered, including about the duration of the supply and the conditions for terminating the contract. They are protected against unfair commercial practices and unfair contract terms. Finally, the Digital Content Directive, which was adopted in 2019 and that applies from 2022, requires the digital content and services, such as video games, to be provided in accordance with the contract terms and with the consumer's reasonable expectations. So the consumers are entitled to remedies when the digital content or the service is not in conformity. And this includes the right to refund of the money the consumers have paid in advance for the content or the service that the provider has failed to supply. So when assessing this citizens' initiative, the Commission will also analyze whether, beyond better enforcement of the current rules, there is a need to update them so that we ensure that consumers can exercise their legal rights more effectively. At this stage, we are not taking a position on a specific solution, and we are instead looking at all the aspects of this initiative. And I'm sure that today's exchanges will also provide really valuable input to our reflections. So I will now pass the floor to my colleague, Giuseppe Abbamonte, who is the Director for Media Policy in DG Connect. Giuseppe.
Thanks very much, Isabelle. I am equally delighted to be here. So we had several occasions to meet with Mr. Zalesak and the other representatives of the Stop Destroying Video Games strategy. We exchanged views last month with the Parliament, and I am personally very happy to present this initiative to discuss the initiative to the representatives of workers, employees, and civil society. I am Director for Media Policy and Copyright. Now, with my media policy hat on, it is important, so I would like to stress that it is important to be borne in mind that video games are very diverse. There are no two games which are developed in the same way, with the same middleware, or the same third-party assets, and it is important not to devise a sort of single solution that fits all, because a single solution may be unworkable for certain games and could lead to affecting unfairly part of the industry. Another thing which is important is that, and which requires careful consideration, are the is the fact that the ECI may have a number of implications, in particular for the building of private servers to keep games playable. And it would be important to understand and assess the impact that this could have on content moderation, cybersecurity, and data protection, because keeping players safe is as important as keeping the game playable. Now, with my copyright, so legal hat on top of my head, there are a few considerations I would like to make. So the first one is that EU rights, so the European copyright legislative framework provides for exclusive rights for authors and other categories of right holders, and the exclusive rights comprises the right to authorize or prohibit certain uses of their works, including the reproduction of the works, the distribution, and the communication to the public of the work. Of course, there are a number of exceptions to these rights. There is no mandatory licensing which is imposed on video games developers. So they enjoy contractual freedoms to commercially exploit their works and determine the terms of the licenses. And the EU legislative framework does not provide for exceptions that cover end of life of copyright product. There is an exception in particular for out-of-commerce work, which is set out in the famous or infamous, depending on the angle, directive of copyright in the DSM. Basically, which provides for the possibility to license out-of-commerce works through collective management organizations and cultural heritage institutions. Now, the exception was thought having books in mind, so a product, a copyrighted product, which is much more static than video games, and the requirements of the exceptions are very peculiar, very strict, and they may be difficult to meet for video games. Do I have 1 more minute? So we know that the matter of continuing to make available video games beyond the date intended by the right holders is, of course, not just a matter for copyright legislation. There is also, as I pointed out before, an issue of protection of cybersecurity and personal data, which need to be borne in mind. And I will stop here, actually. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting our association. I'm going to present our action against Ubisoft. I'll introduce myself. I'm Brune Blanc-Durand. I'm a lawyer within the association Choisir Ensemble. We took a case against Ubisoft a few months ago. There's a PowerPoint presentation to go with this. Ah, yes, there it is. Thank you. Next slide, please. So, who are we? Well, we're a French consumer association. We are the oldest in France and also the largest. So we're a press organization. We have over 400,000 subscribers and 110,000 members of the association. We have 3 main pillars of action. We inform and raise awareness among consumers through our magazine or website. We also take legal action to uphold consumer rights, and we study and influence political public policies through advocacy. Today I'd like to focus on the legal aspect of the association. So we have a service devoted to litigation. We can also take action on a cross-cutting basis across different sectors, insurance, housing, digital. And we also have a significant area on video games. We need to act and react to current affairs, especially in this growing digital age with different uses and different consumer rights issues, and we try to react to those. Next slide, please. So why did we take action in this, the Crew case? Well, this is a particularly important real-world case. This was a game which was published in 2014. There were more than 30 million copies sold. It was sold both physically and in a digital version. And then the servers were cut down and the game was unplayable after that. So there's no way to play the game anymore, whether through the physical version or online. And there were consequences for consumers, and many of them reported this to Choisir. So there were consumers, but also a number of collectives which contacted us. And there was also the ECI. So there was a main issue here at the heart. If you buy a video game, does that mean that you can ask for the right to use it without having the authorization or the willingness of the publisher? So if you buy the physical copy, should you actually still be able to play it even if you don't have the authorization from the publisher? Well, in reality, this challenge goes beyond the Crew. And we took action because we saw that there was quite a worrying trend when it came to the video game sector. We saw that more and more games require a permanent connection, even outside of the multiplayer universe. So this ongoing connection, with these ongoing connections, publishers often reserve the right to cut off the servers and to make the games unplayable. So Ubisoft cut off the servers, but there are other possibilities to have an offline mode, and people will be able to continue playing even if the server was cut off. So this is a big problem for consumers. So what we're doing is we're changing the logic here. We're going from the right to ownership to the right to license. And this is really in favor of the publishers. So what we've got here is a case study which allows us to deal with the sustainability of digital goods. So the idea was really to protect these video games and to try to have clearer law when it comes to consumer rights. Next slide, please. And this brings us on to the nature of our actions and the legal basis. Well, this is interesting because there are a number of different legal avenues here. We decided to take civil action at the Tribunal of Créteil. So this was against the Ubisoft company, and this is where they're located. It's a French company. The headquarters was in Paris. We decided not to go for a class action or a criminal action, but rather to go for civil action, because that would mean that there would be compensation for consumers. So we're trying to have some sort of a verdict, some sort of case law, before then asking for compensation for the consumers. When it comes to the legal basis, well, we're thinking of two different things here. This was the choice that we made. I'll explain a little bit later. So we're looking at abusive clauses in the terms and conditions for use, so the end user license agreement of Ubisoft. So we're looking at the validity of certain clauses. So they denied the right of ownership of the video game players to take away access from the game, which was abusive to consumers. And there were also some clauses which was to deny service to consumers. And they were also denying any sort of refund. So these were abusive clauses which were very damaging to consumers. And then we had another legal avenue, which was unfair trading practices. So on the cover of the crew, there was a code, and through this code people were able to find out that the service could be interrupted. In 2023, Ubisoft said they were going to put an end to the service, but the average consumer didn't have access to this information. And maybe that would have influenced the consumer's behavior if they'd had this information in advance. Then maybe they wouldn't have bought the game. But in any case, we think that the consumer wasn't properly informed. Ubisoft reserved a unilateral right to close down the servers, and that no solution was actually put forward. Next slide. So what are we going to ask for at the Créteil Court? Well, we're going to ask for the deletion of abusive and illegal clauses, to put an end to misleading trading practices, compensation for damages for consumers. But as I said, we're looking at something broader as well. We're looking at stepping up the obligations of publishers, greater transparency in the sector, because we now have different uses. So we're seeing that we're moving from hardware, from a physical copy, to a more subscription-based model. And then the last aspect is to increase legal certainty for consumers when it comes to digital goods. So in conclusion, I think we can see that in the Crew case, we can see that there are a number of clear questions which are being raised when it comes to the digital environment today, the digital economy. Thank you very much.
Thank you for giving me the chance to be here today to speak to you about games as cultural heritage from the perspective of the Netherlands Institute for Sound and Vision, Sound and Vision for short. My name is Wytze Koppelman, and I work as a curator for culture and entertainment, including games, at Sound and Vision. Just a brief introduction, because I assume you're not all familiar, perhaps, with our institute. Basically, Sound and Vision is the Dutch Media Archive, Museum and Research Institute. We archive Dutch media, and we're one of Europe's largest media archives. For a long time, we've been the archive for the Dutch public broadcasting service, radio, TV, but our collections actually go back much further than that. The oldest images actually come from 1898. So in our archive, you can see the whole history of media, and for years we've been working on establishing digital collections in the areas of web videos, YouTube, websites, games, and that means that we have the recent media history reflected there as well. We've seen a transformation in our audiovisual landscape, and that means that we are living in a converging media landscape, and the boundaries between different forms of media are becoming more permeable. You have second screens, you have types of games like apps of well-known TV programs, and so from that perspective, for Sound and Vision as an audiovisual archive, it's a logical step for us to move to ensure that, as well as classic forms of media like film and TV, we safeguard digital media forms like games before they disappear. Archiving this media means that we can pass on our cultural and media history now and in the future. It means that we can make things available in education as a basis for research. Another important thing, it means that people can get pleasure from a media product which has been produced. So it's very clear for us that all these functions are equally important when it comes to games. Now, archiving games is a relatively new practice, but the cultural value of this practice has already been recognised. In recent years, demo scenes in various European countries have been recognised as UNESCO immaterial heritage, and that has happened in the Netherlands as well. In the 1980s, lots of young non-professional programmers started out at amateur clubs reprogramming games. So they made introduction screens, for example, for existing games with their own name or nickname on. They then shared these with each other. And it was also a chance for them to show off about who had the best programming skills. Now, these young programmers from then are now established professionals in the games industry. This is an origin story, and what you see is that was a period of extreme importance for the development of the professional games industry in Europe. But at the same time, this creates work for me and my colleagues. We have to archive these games because we want to ensure that the immaterial aspect can be passed on and that games can be played again. So the games which were made back then. That's possible because some of the games have been safeguarded and they're still playable now and they're still accessible. Now I'm talking, or have been talking about the 80s just then, but accessibility has been an issue for years when you're talking about what we have now. And that's a problem for me as a curator. There's a risk of the building blocks of our cultural history disappearing. The story of the demo scene, yes, it can be passed on, but if we don't have the games, then we can't illustrate it visually. And people can't play the games if we don't have them. And that really is the criterion which differentiates games from other forms of media. So personal expression through gaming, through interactions. Now, there are replacements like recorded gameplay videos, but the essence of this medium lies in the possibility to actually play a game. So this issue, Stop Destroying Games, is important from a cultural, historical and heritage perspective. And for Sound and Vision and other European archives, it's important that these games don't disappear and that they remain accessible in a playable form. So Sound and Vision is working with rights holders of the games we are archiving. They basically give us the permission to archive their game. Now, that was fairly straightforward for games in the 80s, but now the links to online services means that the archiving of games has become more difficult. You have to look at the form in which you're going to archive a game which has been going on for years, how you ensure that a game is playable in the future from a cultural heritage perspective. So questions like this are keeping me and my colleagues at Sound and Vision busy. And not just this. At European level, we're working with initiatives like FCAMP, which is the European Federation of Game Archives, Museums and Preservation Projects. Sound and Vision is involved in that as well. We're working to ensure more cooperation at European level to ensure that we safeguard and keep games and games culture. And a cultural historical perspective is the common theme in all of this. And we need to look at the long term because only later we'll be able to look at things from a different perspective. But in order for that to be able to happen, we need games actually to be there so we can have them as a basis. And we want people to be able to play the games in the future as well. So that's why what's been discussed here today is essentially important for us as well. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much for presenting the case for Stop Destroying Video Games, third trial. And I think whoever thinks it's only in brackets about video games doesn't understand the economic impact this had and also the cultural impact that playing video games does have. And as someone who already was in the generation where video games were big and has a son who is enjoying video games, does have no. However, my question would be, in how far have you with the initiative also had the intention to look a bit beyond video games? Because obviously the underlying problem there is something that consumers do experience also in other fields. I just recall that some of the consumers bought an American-based electric vehicle from Fisker and who faced the problem that this car couldn't run anymore because the company went bankrupt and the servers where the car was connected didn't work anymore. And obviously this issue of the ever greater interdependence of consumer goods like the car, which is a good example because it's pretty much of an investment that you are doing, that is depending on servers operating for your navigation system, and you do not have the possibility to switch to a different one because things like the range of your battery electric vehicles very much depend on that everything is working, that it is connected. So there is a growing, I think, concern from the side of the consumers that do the companies that provide this will be able to have this kind of server infrastructure for you, or will they come up later in time and charge you additionally? is an issue that might go beyond the video game issue. So my question would be to the initiative and to the Commission, if you had a look a bit beyond the scope of the video games as such. Thank you.
Thank you for this incredibly interesting topic. I didn't know that much about it before, but it's very interesting because it has all of the elements, abusive clauses, contracts, programmed obsolescence, or if we want to be politically correct, premature obsolescence, if we want to be a little bit more correct in that regard, and also deceptive policies. I have a question for Pavel. When it comes to the non-solutions, you speak about clearer labeling. Of course, this isn't a solution to the problem, but clear labeling would help the consumer to know what problem they might face. Because when we sell something, we're buying something to rent, we're selling it to rent. But then you might know if when you cut the legal contract, it's no longer your product. This is something that would be quite interesting, not just in this case, but in general. And for Ms. Isabelle Perignon, when it comes to the Digital Fairness Act, is this going to play a role in video games? This isn't just a problem that's been seen in this initiative. But then you see with the boxes of that the students are able, that young people are able to buy with currency. This has been legislated on in Spain. There's a lot of pressure from the sector, and unfortunately we had to remove a draft law because of pressure from the sector. But it would be interesting if the DFA could legislate on this. And finally, in reference to what was said by the professor, I found this very interesting. As a representative of Spanish consumers, I would be interested in seeing that the single market has law that applies in the whole single market. But we see in other areas such as German, Italian and Belgian consumers that have received compensation, but Spanish consumers, after many years, are still fighting in the court in Barcelona, waiting for a resolution about this issue. And there are more than 3,000 people that were affected in this collective action. Thank you.
Thank you for this initiative, and thank you for the very interesting legal considerations mentioned. Just a couple of things. Firstly, tying in with what a Spanish colleague said. I represent Italian consumers. I think it's important to say that this type of practice is wrong. So, I mean, you can ask courts in Europe for their position, yes, to say whether or not they think this is against European law, but that's my position. Then a question for the colleague from Choisir. If I understood correctly, this lawsuit they've started is an individual one. It's not a class action suit or a suit with the aim of inhibiting something. They're waiting for a decision to see whether to move forward with a collective case, if I've understood correctly.
Thank you very much. I had the pleasure to listen to the first presentation a few months ago with a Civil Society Week that took place here in the House, and we had a day on European citizen initiatives, and it was really interesting. So when I first heard about the initiative, it was, okay, what is it about? And then with the first presentation, I started thinking, and I'm really happy that you were successful and that we're having this debate now here as well. And I think the EESC is exactly the house of the place to talk about such initiatives and give them also more visibility. But when I heard about it for the first time, I was thinking back, and it's not really a new phenomenon, to be honest. So when I'm thinking back to the days when I started buying video games, I went to the shop and then I came home with a CD. I put it into my computer, and on the CD there was all of the information I needed to install the game and to play the game. And then technology came. First of all, there was a new operating system, and suddenly the game did not work anymore because the operating system was more advanced than the game allowed to, and so I could not play it anymore. Then later on, of course, who still has got a computer with a CD-ROM drive? Nobody does. So I've got a number of games at home that I simply cannot play anymore. I do know this is a different scale, and now with the internet and the service, this definitely is a larger phenomenon. But I think the point I want to make is that this is a common practice, that this is, well, as a trade unionist, I might even say capitalism, trying to make profit as far as possible and not really thinking about the responsibility on the consumers. So my question to the panel is, and I know some of you tried to touch it, how we could build a legal framework that is also future-oriented, that is trying to anticipate future changes. And we know that especially with artificial intelligence, digitalization, so many things change so quickly, and we're always trying to react, and we're a step behind. So is there a possibility how we could build a more anticipative structure, a legal framework to protect consumers, and that we don't have to discuss pretty much the same issue every other year, maybe now with video games, or as Dirk explained earlier, in other spheres as well. So just trying to reflect on this future-oriented aspect as well. Thanks.
Well, I especially find the last question an interesting point, because from my working practice, let's say, as an archivist, you always have the honor to come in last. So let's say this anticipatory waves of how the market changes according to, well, let's say capitalism, is also very relevant to us. And in that sense, a framework such as that would be, on the one hand, very helpful when I'm looking to the future. But on the other hand, we need this, let's say, minimum viable base of products still available and still being able to run this old software, at least from our, let's say, cultural heritage perspective. So I would very much plead for a balance in that sense. And that would be something that would be very interesting for us to look at, so where the balance lies in this sense. Also because I think that if people want to still play older games, the initiator cannot be, and also the abolisher cannot always be the making or the publishing party in that sense. And if you ask me, that is also something that is pretty much at issue here, as to how far can the ball roll before someone draws a line as to you can or cannot do this with a game, me being a consumer or me being an archivist in that sense.
Yeah, so thank you very much for your questions. 3 points on consumer issues that you raised, which I find extremely relevant. So first of all, as we explained, I mean, we are preparing the position from the Commission in a communication that will be adopted by the College on the 16th of June, and the scope is really how to address this specific European Citizens Initiative. So the scope of our reply would be really to give a clear answer to the initiators of this European Citizens Initiative. But I agree with you that these practices are indeed very similar to other sectors. And that's really where my second point comes, because in the field of consumer law, I mean, what we have for more than 20 years developed in Europe is a system of principle-based rules, which means that we try to give, you know, the basis like transparency before you buy to the consumers, the necessity to equip the consumers with with means to fight against unfair contract terms, practices, to the means to fight against unfair commercial practices. So that's the basis of what we have developed over more than 20 years in our consumer law. And the reaction and the position that we are going to take will be especially based on this, which means that we have a very pragmatic approach. We are going to check with my team how to address with the existing legislation already available, which are principle-based, so applicable to all sectors, what is already covered by our legislation, and to see and analyze whether there are some gaps and how we can help and fill the gaps. And so my third point is precisely that we are also preparing for the end of this year the Digital Fairness Act. We had, and we already discussed that together, we had a public consultation with more than 7,000 contributions precisely to tell us, well, look, here, there, we have still some gaps which are not addressed by the principle-based consumer law that you have in Europe. And it's very important that you address these gaps, taking into consideration that indeed we all, and we wish that we can address all the new phenomena that appear regularly, because our dream is that we anticipate, the problems that are coming to the markets. But in the end, what is, I think, a message of reassurance and optimism is that we have a strong legal basis already that can address many of the issues at stake. Thank you.
Maybe one issue which, so the issue of interoperability is, of course, at the heart of the problem, and it is also at the heart of one of the most important digital laws, which is the Digital Market Act. And there is something which has to be, which may be, carefully considered, taken into account in addressing this issue. But there is another issue. So there was a statement made at the beginning, according to which most modern games can function indefinitely without support. And maybe there is a question to Wytze. Is it really true that most next generation video games can function autonomously without support? Because my understanding is that they utilize a sort of always online model, and the software which is bought or which gets licensed to the consumer is only one part of the story. The other half of the story, so the logic of the game, the matchmaking, the progression data, lives on the publisher's basically remote servers. So is it really possible?
Well, that depends very much on what kind of game you're looking at, in that sense that, let's say as a statement, every game is unique, just like every movie is unique that we make, like every piece of music that we make is unique. And the intent or maybe genre or gameplay per game differs. And also, if you were to fast forward into the future, also playing those games in the future could be a whole different experience. Let's, for example, take two big games, a World of Warcraft or a Fortnite, where you play online with multiple people. If the essence of that game is to play online with multiple people, then if you want to have that same experience, let's say as a structural line, you would always have to have the possibility to play online with multiple people. And a lot of the questions around this proposal are how you can manage something like that, that you can, well, let's say, give players a minimal viable experience over time that would still constitute what the game makers envisioned when they were making the game, then that it would still be possible to have that level of, well, let's say, enjoyment or artistry that the makers put in. And that, again, differs very much per games. Some games are a single-player experience which you can spend 90 or even 200 or even indefinite amount of hours in. Some games are games where you have one game that lasts 30 minutes and you're going to play it with a lot of people. But maybe to make a point out of that, those differences have to be quite leading in how you go about making rules or IDs when it comes to the progression of this proposal in that sense. There are so many tiny differences also that you have to take into account.
Yes, all right. I'll go very fast with a few of the questions we got. First of all, with De la Iglesia, you pointed out a classic problem on consumer protection, which is the fragmentation of the single market. we think we can face this on the digital single market if we want to provide the same level of protection. And it is more not like on the afterwards protection, but more like the abusive clauses work. They have a meaning to disencourage the usage of abusive clauses because they cause nullity and everything. So if it was put this way for the digital single market and for the stop destroying video games, it would work because it would disencourage the usage of abusive clauses. For Mrs. Reisecker, yes, historically, law always follow reality. It is hard to regulate something that we don't get to see, but only can imagine. And there's another effect, typical effect of law. When you put regulation in something, regulation causes pressure to comply with the law. So any company, any economical body that wants to operate in that market will try to move away from the legal pressure. That's why we are always chasing after technology. Besides of that, our initiative is technologically neutral. We don't ask for a specific measure or it should be done this way. No. We let the creators be free for their solutions. What we ask is simple. Please do not destroy the game. For Mr. Bergrath, he's absolutely right. To be honest, we cannot exceed the scope of the ECI, but the underlying problem is exactly what you said. Can I be honest? Because there has been technological progress, there cannot be a regression on rights. If we are progressing technologically, but rights don't follow, we will go to a society with further technology, but lesser rights. So rights of the consumers, the citizens, have to follow the technological progress. And if we're moving to a digital distribution model, we should not have less rights than we had in the 20th century. Because if we're moving forward but with lesser rights, we're not truly moving forward. We're getting backwards. On the usage of IP rights, I have to state, consumers don't make reproductions, distribution, communication to the public, transformation. They just play the game. So we are not asking anything on IP law, just not to destroy the game after it's been purchased by the consumer. And Mr. Abbamonte is right. I give him a nice salutation from here. I appreciate the work you do. He's absolutely right on there is a right to withdraw from commerce. So distributors are not obligated to sell forever. And we are absolutely okay with that. We're not asking that. What we are asking is not to destroy what has been already sold. There is no right to pull back units of books or anything you bought. There can come anybody from a company and take your things from your house. And it shouldn't be that way in the digital realm as well. And finally, for Mrs. Brune Blanc-Durand, she's been very spot on her pointings of the matter. I'd like to be in contact with you in the future. So that's all from my side. Thank you.
Well, when it comes to a class action, well, our main objective was to have individual actions at this moment. We're really looking at the market and trying to have immediate case laws and then trying to have a verdict later on, which would bring about compensation. But our main objective was to answer the question that we set out. So can a publisher close down a server and deprive a player of the game? So we had already done something similar against another video game publisher, Valve, about reselling a game. Can you resell a game which has already been bought? A digital game. This is something which went up to the Court of Appeal. Court stated that you can't resell a digital game. And then with the crew, we're also looking about whether you can withdraw access to a game. And of course the answer is no. So that's what we're looking at with our case. And what we're trying to do is to really protect the consumer by withdrawing these abusive clauses.
I would like to also address the question for de la Iglesia, Mrs. You are right on those facts of the selling, but let's bear in mind that the gamers paid full price. So it is clear that there should be like two models, selling and then the renting. But there's something kind of useless around it, is that if the labeling states that we can destroy, the problem is not solved. And besides that, the label can be clear and still be unfair under the Directive 93/13, which is procedural transparency does not excuse substantive unfairness. Thank you.